Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. This is Bram for Unit 8. For these works that we read, these histories with Ronke and Jansen, we are back to Martin Luther, and we're going back into like a much deeper history than we had a chance to before. It was nice to start with him at the beginning of the semester for just like an origin of German religious histories, but now we're actually investing into this character and how he influenced like the politics around him during the late 15th and early 16th centuries with a more in-depth look. So starting with Ronke, with his history of Reformation in Germany, I love the discussions of like Charles V and the Diet of the Worms. So this history really talks about like the government style, right, of the Holy Roman Empire, right? The Diet that met up, it showed what their agenda was, like what their imperial positions were like, what their best interests were for the Holy Roman Empire. And Charles V, he seems to be one that always keeps these German princes in mind, right? Of course, he has to be conscious of like the Lutheran controversy, and all these individuals that are opposing that they dare to oppose Rome, and then the popes end up mitigating Spain. But at the same time, Charles V is trying to keep the Holy Roman Empire together, right? And he's trying to keep them just united with the Diet of the Worms, but clearly he is struggling very much so. But also in Ronke's work, there's the notion of like the beginnings of the Germanic peoples, right? So like the Friesland, that they forced their way across the Rhine, and then the youthful prince of the Germanic race, Karl Martel, comes into the picture, and the Pope ends up allying himself with Karl. And so that was a very fascinating aspect of history, because Karl, being a Germanic prince himself of Friesland, he represents a powerful military figure. And the Pope, on the other hand, represents a very strong tied to the Catholic Church and a deity, like the God. So it's fascinating that both of those forces work together as early as like I want to say the 8th, 9th, or even 10th centuries. Like it's amazing how early Germanic ties to religion are, right? They didn't just start up when the Holy Roman Empire started. They started before that, and from the 8th century on, 1,000 years worth of ties between like political and ecclesiastical history, and it's just really fascinating. Moving on to Jansen's article, though, or Jansen, however you pronounce that, of the history of the German people. That was fascinating because it shows like a remarkable transition between the Middle Ages within Central Europe to the times of the Reformation between the Protestants and the Catholics. And it was cool to see, Martin Luther's origin story there, right? Like his studies of German hymns, of the philosophical and theological writers like Aristotle, Virgil, Plautus, and how he viewed the Pope as the Antichrist. And obviously, that's going to affect Emperor Charles V and his imperial coalition, because he has to decide who he stands with and so forth. And the last aspect that I desperately need to talk about is when they tried to burn Luther's books, right? Where they tried to not just limit what he exposed to people, but they just wanted to bar it completely, right? They didn't want the Holy Roman Empire to be studying his works or his teachings. They feared that he was too radical, and they feared a violent insurrection, which, despite Charles V constantly trying to, work against and constantly trying to eliminate, it seemed like no matter what he or the imperial coalition did, the German people rose up against them, and they sided with Martin Luther.